Hi, everyone. It's June 23rd. I'm Vineet Braich here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Here's what's happening this afternoon. It's the 40th anniversary of the Air India bombing, known as the deadliest terrorist attack in Canadian history. So on June 23rd, 1985, Air India Flight 182 took off from Montreal. It was blown up over the Atlantic Ocean on its way to London. All 329 people on board were killed. 280 were Canadians traveling to India. The flight disappeared from the radar off the coast of Ireland after a bomb exploded on the airplane. 40 years later, families continue to mourn, reflect, and mark its tragic legacy. RCMP say the investigation remains one of the largest and most complex in Canadian history, and that it exposed major gaps in intelligence sharing and how victims' families were supported. When it comes to the questions of what led up to it, Crown lawyers alleged during the court proceedings that the bombing was a terrorist attack against state-owned Air India as an act of revenge by BC-based Sikh extremists against the Indian government for ordering the army to raid Sikhism's holiest shrine, the Golden Temple in Amritsar, in June 1984. Two BC men, Ajay Singh Bagri and Ripudaman Singh Malik, were acquitted of murder and conspiracy charges in two bombings. Only one person was ever convicted in the attack for his role, Inderjeet Singh Raith, who served 30 years in jail. RCMP in Lake Louise say the second person who was found dead last week following a rockfall in Banff National Park was a 33-year-old from Surrey. The man's body was found a day after a part of a mountain rock face fell on the Bow Falls Trail. A woman from Calgary was also killed by that falling rock, and 3 others were injured. The name of the victim from Surrey has not yet been released. And staying in Surrey, police say alcohol might have been a factor in a hit-and-run collision last night. It happened in the city centre neighbourhood just after 10 o'clock. A 14-year-old boy was hit by a vehicle near Holland Park. He was transported to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. The driver left the scene but was later arrested near 104th Avenue and Wally Boulevard. No charges have been laid at this time. And tensions are volatile in the Middle East. On Monday, Iran launched missile attacks on U.S. military bases in Qatar and Iraq, retaliation for the American bombing of its nuclear sites this weekend. Well, Qatari officials said its air defenses intercepted that attack. Meanwhile, Israel and Iran have continued to trade airstrikes. The ongoing conflict means that people here are taking more caution. North Vancouver's Persian Festival was postponed over the weekend, and the chair of the Tri-City Iranian Cultural Society told the early edition that they're considering doing the same for their upcoming event.
It's meant to be a cultural celebration, but with this level of grief and uncertainty, it's hard to say whether it's appropriate to move forward as planned. We are in active discussion with our board and community members to make a decision. We are evaluating what's best for our community, both emotionally and ethically.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Mark Carney said that he spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump overnight. He said the conversation focused on de-escalating the conflict in the Middle East. Here in Vancouver, VPD also say that they're increasing presence around popular protest sites as well. That's it for now. I'm Vineet Braich. You're watching CBC News BC. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. There's more criticism over BC Ferries contracting a Chinese state-owned company to build some new vessels. The federal Transport Minister has written to the province about her, quote, great disappointment. But BC Ferries says it was the strongest bid by far. Well, do you think it needs to revisit the decision? And what do you think of the politics around this story? Plus, new guidelines are pushing for better miscarriage care. What do you think needs to improve about the care for miscarriage patients? UBC's Dr. Deborah Money will join us. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Well, Ottawa has slammed BC Ferries and its decision to contract a Chinese state-owned shipyard to build 4 new vessels for its passenger fleet. BC Ferries awarded the contract to China Merchants Industry Weihai Shipywards, saying no Canadian companies bid on the ships. But in a letter addressed to her provincial counterpart, Mike Farnworth, Federal Transportation Minister Chrystia Freeland expressed concerns about lack of Canadian presence in the procurement, as well as security risks, quote, given the geopolitical context. Freeland wrote, I am surprised that BC Ferries does not appear to have been mandated to require an appropriate level of Canadian content in the procurement or the involvement of the Canadian marine industry. I would like your assurance that BC Ferries conducted a robust risk assessment, and I expect them to engage with the relevant provincial and federal security agencies and departments to mitigate any security risk. Freeland also cited China imposing tariffs on Canadian goods, including 100% on canola oil, meal, and pea imports. She asked Farnworth to confirm with, quote, utmost certainty that no federal funding will be used to acquire the new ferries. BC's Transportation Ministry said it's reviewing the letter from Chrystia Freeland. Earlier last week, BC Premier David Eby said that the contract is not preferred, but he will not interfere in BC Ferries' decision. And he said canceling the contract at this stage would come with many costs. But the union representing shipyard workers says Canadian shipyards have the skills to build new ferries locally, but a lack of investment has limited their capacity. Here's Eric McNeely, with the BC Ferry and Marine Workers Union.
I feel like the ship construction contract for BC Ferries created 2 challenges that were functionally insurmountable, which was a very short time frame for the number of vessels and then the cost. So. And I think with Minister Freeland, there's an opportunity from the federal government as well. In 2016, the federal government removed, through a ferry remission order, the tariff, the import tax on ferries, which is 25% of the value of the vessel. That's been provided an opportunity for internationally built vessels to come into Canada and creates a much more difficult situation for domestic shipbuilding. So it's difficult to compete when in Canada we have very high labor standards, safety standards, and high quality steel, for example, whereas other parts of the world, that's not the case.
That's Eric McNeely, president of the BC Ferry and Marine Workers Union. Okay, so we're asking you, does BC Ferries need to revisit its contract for new vessels with a Chinese state-owned shipyard? What do you think of the criticism? What about the politics around this? Our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is Stewart Prest, political scientist at the University of British Columbia. Stewart, thanks so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure, Michelle.
I want to start, kind of go back a bit here because this story has been brewing for a while now, right? A week or so. So when the deal was announced, the CEO of BC Ferries, Nicholas Jimenez, said CMI Weihai was the clear choice, he said, based on the overall strength of its bid. Noted that the shipyard has built ferries for several major Western corporations. It also said it didn't receive a bid from a Canadian company. So where did the criticism of this decision first come?
Well, I think there is a heightened sensitivity around trade between Canada and all of its major trading partners right now. We see Canada in a tense relationship with the United States, but we have this longer running dispute with China, stretching back in some ways to fall of last year. But of course, it's been a fraught relationship for longer than that. So I think anytime we see a significant contract involving government funding, and this is a government-owned entity with a state-owned enterprise in China, it is going to raise some eyebrows and attract additional scrutiny, particularly given that additional tension.
Right. And so what do you make of that reception to the announcement, given the focus on by BC, Canadian-made products, that sensitivity toward focusing on Canada first?
Yeah, it really does seem like this announcement hits at the confluence of two competing agendas. One is to buy Canadian, to try to support the Canadian economy, but of course the other imperative for governments is to keep prices down and to try to find ways to address issues of affordability. And of course, the affordability of ferry traffic in BC is a perennial headache for British Columbians.
So what do you think of, let's get to the politics around this then. David Eby saying reversing this decision would come with many costs. He didn't want to intervene when asked about this. And now we have this letter from Federal Transportation Minister Chrystia Freeland.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of irony here. The reason that BC Ferries operates as an independent corporation, right. Its board is ultimately appointed by actors appointed by government, but it is supposed to act like an independent corporation that is responsible for maintaining a black bottom line and to pay attention to things like cost certainty and affordability. But the reason that is so is because in the 1990s, a previous NDP government got itself too involved in the selection of a ferry to replace an aging part of the fleet, and that led to the Fast Ferry scandal. Right. And so we have a sense where the NDP lost the ensuing election in part because of that. We moved the BC Ferries to a more independent stance, and now the current NDP government is effectively being criticized for not being political enough in its involvement in BC Ferries procurement strategy.
And do you think it has a leg to stand on there when it comes to also saying this was the best bid by far, I think is what the CEO of BC Ferries had to say, and that this is why the Premier doesn't want to step in?
Well, it's certainly an important consideration. My understanding is that the other competitive bids coming from European interests, they were substantially more expensive. The fact that Canadian shipyards were not able to put together a bid, in part owing to the role of Canadian federal government projects replacing Coast Guard and Navy vessels, points to other areas of tension where we do have federal government investment in Canadian shipyards, but they're also using up a lot of that capacity right now. So there are limited options in terms of alternatives to this Chinese bid.
That's an interesting point, because does BC shipbuilding, does the industry here have the capacity when it is busy meeting the demands of the Navy needs as well, of those naval contracts? So that's a really interesting point you make. So we'll talk about that as well. How do we build up shipbuilding in Canada if we're looking to the future here? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Asking you, does BC Ferries need to revisit its contract for new vessels with a Chinese state-owned shipyard? What do you make of the criticism, and what do you think of the politics around all this? Now, Chrystia Freeland, the Federal Transportation Minister, weighing in too. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 or email bctoday@cbc.ca. I see lots of emails coming in now too, but let's go to the phones first. Mark is on the line in Parksville. Hi, Mark.
How are you doing?
I am just fine. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this BC Ferries contract?
Well, I don't think there's any choice. Every time BC Ferries is half an hour late with the sailing, because there's the media climb a little bit over them when they have to go to the only possible at this point place where they can build them. I understand the Germans were more expensive, but also much longer to complete the 6 ships that they need, although they're only allowed 4. They should have asked for 5, they got
Right.
4, they should have asked for 6 and got 6. That way they would have replaced all of the C-class and the poor dear old Queen of New Westminster that is still struggling along after 60 years.
Yeah, you're making a point there about the aging fleet, the need to replace it. So here we are with a contract now. But what about that call to have a Canadian company, or the criticism that why is there no Canadian bid that first went forward or secondly was considered?
Well, you can't consider something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But the Canadian shipyards that are there, I heard a comment earlier that the Canadian workers are skilled enough, and they are, but there's not nearly enough of them. The 2 shipyards, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, that are building for the Coast Guard and the Navy are struggling to meet their delivery commitments because they can't get people to do the work. Mm-hmm. Well, adding production requirement is not going to help production when you don't have enough people to do it.
So, okay, so what do you think of the politics around this then? The criticism from the federal transportation minister, the union just saying, and Chrystia Freeland saying there needs to be a robust look at how this all happened.
Well, you can look at it all you want. You want new ships. Mm-hmm. That's the thing.
That's the bottom line for you.
It is, and I think Chrystia Freeland is just making political hay when she knows that there is no other answer.
Okay. Mark, interesting point there. Thank you very much. There is a need. Here's a bid that seems to fulfill that need. At the same time, we heard from the union, Stewart Prest, that what about the conditions to enable the local and Canadian shipbuilding industry to flourish? And what about the fact that there may be differences in what companies can offer because of those differences in labor standards, for example? So was there really a level playing field here?
In many ways, no. There are advantages to production in developing economies that places like Canada cannot match. It's remarkable to think about this in terms of the present era versus, say, 10 or 15 years ago. In some ways, this would be the perfect globalized political arrangement from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where we are finding ways to realize gains from trade, having something built offshore for a considerably cheaper price. But that is not the only thing we care about anymore. Now we are in this new world. We have new priorities in terms of onshoring work and onshoring productive capacities, and we can do that over time. Things like federal government investments can speed those processes along, but they do take time. And this seems to be something of a middle place and an uncomfortable place where we simply don't have that capacity, but certainly we could work towards it in the future.
What do you think this says about the trade relationship that Canada currently has with China?
I think it's a reminder that we have a complex relationship with both our not only our neighbor to the south, and we talk about that a lot, but also with the other major emerging superpower in the world, with China, that it's quite possible and indeed likely that even as we are dealing with a trade war, a trade conflict over things like steel and aluminum production and agricultural goods, we still will likely need to do business of different kinds with China. It is the new workshop of the world. We can't simply ignore that. And if we do want to go in a different direction, it is likely going to cost more, and it is going to negatively affect those other concerns like affordability.
Okay, I'll put out the numbers again here. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And some emails here now. Let's just go through them. Hugh writes, my wife Joan was cutting up chicken for dinner when she heard the news about the ferry contract going to China. She said, why did I bother voting NDP? My own response, I wonder what the two Michaels are thinking, referring to the detention of Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig in China long term. And of course, that was the source of such a real diplomatic tension between Canada and China. Do you think any of that plays a role here in the kind of reaction that we're seeing to this essentially a business contract?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. We have a long-term damaged relationship, if you like, that we are still in the process of rebuilding between Canada and China, and the two Michaels effectively being political prisoners for an extended period of time, as we dealt with the extradition request for Meng Wanzhou. That has left a mark, and I think that has increased the degree of skepticism and scrutiny around any major deal like this with China. And yet we still have to deal with these concerns of affordability. So I don't know that there is an easy way out for the government here. No matter what they do, they are going to come in for a measure of criticism, I think.
Ralph is our next caller now from Powell River. Hi, Ralph. What do you think of the criticism around this contract BC Ferries has inked with a Chinese state-owned company? Hi, Ralph, are you there? I'm not sure Ralph can hear us. Let's just read an email for now and wait for Ralph to come on the air. Scott writes in Burnaby, instead of hiring China to build more diesel ferries, BC should partner with European companies already making next generation electric hydrofoil ferries like Artemis in Belfast. These ferries are faster, quieter, and perfect for connecting more coastal communities. We could start by buying a few and then set up factories here in BC to maintain and eventually build them ourselves. It's a smarter investment, creating local jobs and launching clean tech instead of sending more money overseas for outdated technology. Okay, thank you for that point. Let's try Ralph once again in Powell River. Ralph, are you there?
Yes, hello, I'm there.
Hi there. Thanks for calling in. What are your thoughts on this contract and the criticism that's come to it?
Well, I'm all for Canadians buying Canadian products, that's for sure. But when it comes to contracts like this, it's no easy buy for the Canadian economy. And at the same time, I think that the federal government has no right to mix into the provincial decisions if they do not want to support paying for the ferries.
Okay, so you're saying it's a matter of political interference? Would you go so far to say that?
I wouldn't say
Sure.
interference.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say that if the federal government doesn't want to support the provinces in putting out money for things that the citizens of the province need, then they don't have the right to criticize the provincial government.
I take your point. Thank you so much for the call, Ralph. Glad we connected with you. And Stewart Prest, so the federal transport minister said she wants reassurance that no federal funding will go toward this. And that interesting piece in the Tayi by Paul Wilcox today, in fact, he's written that when it comes to this debate, he makes the point that he says the federal government does not have a legitimate role in this debate. And while she notes that the federal government helps to fund BC Ferries, Paul Wilcox writes Ottawa provides about $35 million or 3% of ferry revenue. And he says 3% does not let you dictate to BC Ferries management. So what do you make of the point that Ralph's making, the extent of the role that the federal government should have here?
I think there is something to that. This letter from Ms. Freeland is, I think, in some ways political in the sense of a kind of symbolic gesture, saying, while we, the federal government, continue our trade war with China, we have nothing to do with this contract, and trying to build a little daylight there and to build a little insulation, saying that we expect the BC Ferries to abide by all national security priorities and legislation. And BC Ferries, for its part, is indicating that it is doing so, making sure that the IT components are being produced in Canada and they're not violating any directives from the federal government on that score. And so I think there is a certain amount of what would you say, covering one's behind on this letter as well, just saying that the federal government doesn't agree with this, they don't like it, but at the end of the day, they are not going to do anything to stop it. So, there is that performative aspect as well.
Performative. Okay, Paul is our next caller now in Vancouver. Hi, Paul.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
I just wanted to chime in and say that I completely agree with your previous caller, Ralph. Shouldn't be criticizing if there's nothing that they could do about it. But moreover, my comment is, why can't we do something? Why couldn't the provincial government of whichever province gets the job to build the ships subsidize just the workers with an incentive, like they don't have to pay property taxes, they have reduced mortgage rates, something, any way for the employer to say, look, guys, we can't afford to pay you competitive wages with the European countries, et cetera. But what we can do is pay you solid wages, and the government of the province, we'll just say it's BC, for example, who's building the ships.
Yeah.
The BC government would say to the workers, we're going to give you guys, if you are a homeowner, you won't have to pay your mortgage until the ships are completed. If you are a renter, then we're going to subsidize your rent. Something like that would just...
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sorry to jump in, but an interesting point there. And again, looking toward how do we build not just the capacity, I guess, for the companies, but that workforce that they seem to need in order to meet the demand of current contracts, and now looking at perhaps future demand. So I wonder if that's where the conversation goes now too. Paul, thank you so much for the call from Vancouver. Stewart Prest, always good to talk to you. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Michelle.
Stewart Prest, political scientist at UBC. It's 12:28 now. Now to the latest developments in the Middle East following the U.S. bombing of Iranian nuclear sites. Iran says it launched missile attacks toward a U.S. military base in Qatar as reports of explosions were heard over Doha. Iranian state TV called the attack a, quote, might and successful response to America's aggression. Reuters spoke to a U.S. official who say no missiles appear to have hit the airbase. Meanwhile, in BC, Iranian Canadians are feeling the weight of the tensions as they navigate division in their communities. Behzad Abdi is with the Tri-City Iranian Cultural Society. He spoke with Stephen Quinn this morning.
As you know, currently our community is deeply conflicted and emotional about what is happening in Iran. It's a very real paradox in our community. Many Iranians view the Islamic regime as a source of oppression, crime, and violence, both at home and abroad. So now, when there is a military action that targets regime forces, they feel relief, even hope. They see this moment as one where key figures are finally being held accountable. But at the same time, we are also deeply concerned, like anyone would be, for innocent people or friends and family in Iran who are caught in the crossfire of these developments. There is sorrow and anxiety because innocent lives are often the ones who suffer the most.
Yes.
No one wants bloodshed.
Behzad Abdi is with the Tri-City Iranian Cultural Society. .12:30 now. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming as well. Very good to have you with us this Monday afternoon. And coming up in our next half hour, we're going to talk about something that occurs is all too common and yet is still rarely talked about, and that's miscarriage. There are new guidelines for compassionate miscarriage care. We're going to talk to a professor at UBC, and we'll ask you, what do you think needs to improve about how we care for miscarriage patients in BC? That conversation coming up after the CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Qatar says it intercepted an Iranian missile attack on a U.S. military base in Doha. Tehran fired missiles at the Al Udeid Air Base, the headquarters for U.S. operations in the Middle East. Officials in Doha say no one was injured in the attack and calls it a flagrant violation of Qatar's sovereignty. Iran says it launched the same number of missiles the U.S. used to attack its nuclear sites. The RCMP and Lake Louise say the second person who was found dead last week following a massive rockfall in Banff National Park was a 33-year-old from Surrey. A woman from Calgary was also killed. 3 others were injured. The name of the Surrey victim has not been released. And the wildfire situation in the interior has improved thanks to heavy rain over the last few days. The Kamloops region currently has 4 active fires, and they are all listed as under control. Between Friday and Sunday, some areas logged up to 50 millimeters of rain. And now taking a look at the forecast on the north coast, cloudy this afternoon with a high of 15, highs reaching 22 with local smoke and a risk of thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a high of 22 with some sunshine and a chance of thunderstorms as well. Highs up to 23 with some sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a mix of sun and cloud with highs in the mid-20s. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, lots of sunshine this afternoon with highs reaching 22 degrees. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Rob, thanks so much. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. All right, well, the NBA Finals wrapped up last night. The Oklahoma City Thunder defeated the Indiana Pacers. It was also a huge night for Canadian OKC player Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He has become only the 4th player in the league to win season MVP, Finals MVP, most valuable player, a scoring title, and play for a championship team all in the same season. The only other 3 people to do it, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Jordan, and Shaquille O'Neal, who did it 25 years ago. Here's Gilgeous-Alexander speaking to reporters after the game last night.
It's hard to believe that I'm part of that group. It's hard to even fathom that I'm that type of basketball player sometimes. As a kid, you dream, and every kid dreams, but you don't ever really know if it's going to come true. And I'm just glad and happy that my dreams have been able to come true, and that's a thank you to everyone that's been in my corner that's helped me get here. I wouldn't be able to do it without them. They know exactly who they are.
Such a great series to watch. I thoroughly enjoyed it. 4 Canadian players on the 2 finals teams last night. So already strong Canadian content there. And speaking of CanCon, the first Canadian to win NBA MVP was Victoria's own Steve Nash, winning it back-to-back actually in 2005 and 2006 when he was playing for the Phoenix Suns. I remember it like it was yesterday. So exciting. More reaction perhaps from fans throughout the day here on CBC. .34 now. You're with BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. It is a topic that is still taboo, although very common, and an experience that is, though, very painful to go through. Early pregnancy loss occurs in about 15% of pregnancies, but researchers say the care around miscarriage still has many gaps. The Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada are issuing new guidelines for early pregnancy loss. The goal is to improve compassionate care for patients, including better mental health supports. We'll talk to a UBC professor of obstetrics and gynecology in a moment, and we're also asking you, what do you think needs to improve about how we care for patients experiencing miscarriage? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. Now, this is a very sensitive and emotional topic, and I just want to put out some support lines for you as well. You can call the BC Mental Health Support Line at 310-6789. That's 310-6789. It's a 24-hour line, and you don't need an area code. My guest is Dr. Deborah Money, a professor of obstetrics and gynecology, medicine, and population at the University of BC. She's been good enough to join us here in studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
I know this is a really difficult conversation, but perhaps because of that, we don't have it very often. Why do you think we don't talk about miscarriage very much?
Well, I think there's been a stigma associated with miscarriage, and women don't talk to other women when they've experienced it, and I think there's even a tendency not to share when you're pregnant until quite late on, at least after 12 weeks. So when pregnancy losses happen, they're kind of silent, maybe put away, and I think what this guideline is suggesting we all do is that we actually acknowledge that this is a really difficult thing, difficult for the patients to go through, and actually difficult as a care provider to deal with, because we feel like we can't make it better for them.
Yeah, what's it like for you as a care provider?
I think as an obstetrician gynecologist, we want to have something to offer the patient. And when a patient has an early pregnancy loss, there isn't actually an intervention. We can't make it not happen usually. There are a few things in recurrent pregnancy loss, but most of the time it's supporting the women through this usually inevitably unhappy circumstance.
Yeah, it's so difficult. And how lacking is that support then, your ability to support them through that incredibly horrible process?
Well, I think what this guideline highlights is that our system has some improvements that it could undertake to perhaps be more cognizant of the emotions around the event. Even if it's not a medical emergency, women need support. Women need to be heard. For some women, they maybe take it a little bit more in stride. For other women, it's devastating, particularly if getting pregnant has been a difficult thing to happen.
Yes, I can imagine as well if you've already been through a very long process. So when it comes to these guidelines, can you tell me about what stands out for you?
Well, I think it's probably the first time I've seen a real emphasis on the compassion and the mental health support. There are some aspects of the guideline that's very helpful around specifics around the ultrasound measurements and so on, and helpful emphasis on ultrasound versus blood work for a diagnosis, an accurate diagnosis. But probably more remarkable for some of our classic medical guidelines, these are guidelines for care providers, is there's really an emphasis on compassion and how could we do it better? How could we ensure we do depression screening afterwards and that sort of thing?
What are the recommendations and what are they suggesting that you do?
Well, in particular, I think regardless of who you are, whether you're an OBGYN, a family doc, a person at the walk-in clinic or the emergency department, that we all sort of stop and think about what this may mean for the patient in front of us. The other recommendation, which is for more dedicated resources, the early pregnancy assessment clinic is something that they're suggesting. And this is typically a multidisciplinary service that can actually provide focused care on this problem, rather than it being in the middle of a maybe very, very busy urgent care or emergency center.
Yes, I can imagine. I mean, every emergency needs attention, but to walk in, to be experiencing miscarriage and to walk into a very busy emergency room, is that typically what a person goes through?
Well, quite often, if there's significant bleeding, perhaps associated with the threatened or actual miscarriage, then that's often where people turn. We've lost the connection with primary care sometimes, and I think it's become the default place for medical conditions, which is not ideal. We do fortunately have one early pregnancy assessment clinic at BC Women's Hospital here in Vancouver that does provide that sort of focused care Monday to Friday and allows for a place for people to go and either get phone advice or actually get in-person ultrasounds and things like that.
What do you see as a way of delivering more compassionate care then? How do you see that looking?
Well, I think in every hospital and health authority, one has to look at what resources are available and maybe think about more tailored resources to this problem. It's a common problem.
Yeah.
It's 15% of 40,000 pregnancies a year in the province. So it's not a trivial number of people that undergo this, and whether you can maybe put together what we call EPAC, or early pregnancy assessment clinic, or something similar within maybe more limited resources, that's, I think, worth considering. We need to probably develop better telehealth in this area, and we need to more identify individuals who can provide the specific type of ultrasound diagnoses that are needed for this problem.
Okay, so more specificity. Let's put out the numbers once again. We are talking about new guidelines for miscarriage care and a push for an emphasis on compassionate care. So we're asking you, what do you think is needed to improve compassion in caring for miscarriage patients? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. And I'll give out the support line once again. The BC Mental Health Support Line is 310-6789. My guest is Dr. Deborah Money, who's a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at UBC. And Dr. Money, in the guidelines, I also see reference to long-term, the long-term mental health impacts. Can you tell me a bit about that? How does this affect a person down the road?
Well, I think certainly in circumstances where perhaps they never end up actually having a successful pregnancy and children, their pregnancy experience, their maternal experience is maybe only of miscarriage and loss. And so that can really affect somebody. Some individuals can be very affected by that long term. I think the lack of perhaps sharing it with family and friends, it's often something that people don't talk about.
Yeah.
So they don't necessarily get support. And we've not maybe as a society even been as compassionate about this problem. Recognizing that not every woman that or person who can get pregnant, if they don't have children, it may not have been their choice. And
it strikes me when you talk about family and friends. I'm just thinking about people I know and the circles, and there's this sort of discussion on what do you say, and so what can family and friends do to be more compassionate, to be more open and encourage someone to talk about it and to alleviate their own, what they feel.
I don't think there's an absolute script to this,
Yeah.
but I think it's being really asking what could they do to help that individual who's perhaps struggling with this experience, maybe once, maybe or current, and just being caring. It's different for every person how they react to it, but I think the one thing that's important is it's not necessarily trivial, and it may go on, and just kind of buck up or cheer up is probably not the best advice.
Yeah, kind of get over it.
And I think that's been a bit of a tendency.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you think is needed to change that attitude?
Well, I'd like to see the stigma about it reduced, and women feeling more comfortable with sharing that they've gone through a pregnancy loss. And probably as care providers, we could coach and support better there in terms of saying, if you were to tell people that you were pregnant at 8-10 weeks and then lost a pregnancy, how would you handle that? How would that go? Because there's sort of general advice around not sharing that you're pregnant till past that more vulnerable 12-week time.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. And I wonder if primary caregivers would also be involved in that then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's take a call here now as we talk about what's needed to improve miscarriage care. Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Lindsay has called us from Vancouver. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah.
I just want to say that when I was having this problem, it was back in the 60s and in the 80s, and I would be put in a ward, in a bed in the ward with all these women who had just had babies, and they were goo-goo gaga with their babies, feeding their and there I lay, having lost my baby. And I was just, each time that happened, I was just devastated.
I can imagine the pain of that.
Things have changed. That was in the days when Grace was around, Grace Hospital was around, and it was between Grace Hospital and Vancouver General.
Lindsay, yeah, I'm sorry for that experience. I can't imagine how painful that must have been for you.
Well, I hope they're not going through that now.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to say.
Really appreciate hearing from you, Lindsay. Thank you for the call. I heard you. That was quite a heavy sigh you just gave there, Dr. Money. Wow, to have to be surrounded by that.
You know, it's happened. I think we all have recognized that, you know, sometimes with bed pressures and circumstances and trying to ensure that there's a knowledgeable nurse or care provider in maternity, that this has occurred from time to time. I think what these guidelines are calling out is for all of us in the system to think about environment. Where are these women being cared for? Is it a really difficult environment? And if it's the only option in a small facility, talking about that and maybe trying to get them in the corner room that isn't as close to the noise, it's tough because not every facility has dedicated space. But we have to be thoughtful about that.
Now, she was saying, I hope this isn't happening anymore. You're saying it may still, given space.
It could. I mean, I don't have a specific example to share, but it is theoretically possible. And I think it's just something that we need to do the best we can with the resources we have and be as thoughtful and kind about where we situate women going through these difficult times. It's more typically a later miscarriage or loss at a later age that could have this sort of circumstance.
Really appreciate that call. Thank you so much for that. Our numbers again are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. We have a call now from an historian and medical ethicist, and Tom is on the line in Vancouver. Hi, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
I am fine. Thanks so much for calling in. Yeah, what could be done to improve compassion and compassionate care for miscarriage patients?
I think what we have to remember and realize is that ever since we legalized abortion especially, that the fetus at the point of conception, we tend to think of as a non-being. It's not a child. It's not something to mourn until it's born. And so for the mother, however, right from the beginning, that is her child, her baby, and she thinks of it often, in my experience, as a child, which is lost. And so as a society, we tend to look at this as one thing, but for the person involved, it is something very different. So we need to see this as a loss of an infant to the mother, and to understand that the grieving that occurs there is going to be real, and as real as it would be the loss of any loved one. Acknowledge the grief. Tom, thank you very much for your call. Yes, what do you make of that?
I think the comments are very helpful. I think as an individual, many women do feel from that moment of the positive pregnancy test that they are a mother to a developing fetus, and so if there is a loss, I think that is felt as a grief, and that needs to be distinguished from the legality of the fetus as an independent person in our legal system, but as an emotional attachment, it can be very real at a very early gestational age.
And the part of the guidance as well is about medical care to avoid surgery, for example, in order to sort of to relieve the pain of surgery. Medically, what are the ways to improve care for miscarriage patients?
Well, I think, again, the guideline is advising that all options are presented to women so they can make the right personal choice. Sometimes we do what's called expectant management, which is just time, and ultimately, usually, the fetus will pass. In some cases, we now have medications that are able to be used to hasten that process and can be used safely. Occasionally, it can result in bleeding that requires surgery, but in many times, one can avoid surgery with that medical therapy. And then in some cases, minor surgery is either the choice or is needed. But now we have a bit more option than we did many years ago.
Okay. Our numbers again, 604-669-3733. You can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. We also have a 1-800 number, and that's 1-800-825-5950. Leora is calling us from Trail. Hi, Leora. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you very much. My story goes back to prior 1969. I had 3 miscarriages in the years prior to that, and I'm glad that we have the new medical information that we have today, but I'm not so sure about the emotional part of it. Yeah. Back in the day, I was told, oh, well, it's okay, you'll have another one. Or, oh, well, there must have been something wrong with the fetus. You'll try again. Oh, well, you'll be okay. That's hard to take. I am almost 77, and I remember those days very, very clearly, even now. And I've often wondered over the years what could have happened in my life had those 3 children come to term.
Oh. Leora, I hear the grief in you recounting that, and I'm so sorry that you had to face those comments. There is a culture, as Leora said, I'm thankful for the medical improvements, but the culture, the attitudes are still there. And again, I'm so sorry, Leora. Those are things that I would imagine are so painful to hear, and people probably still hear.
And I think that's I think it really highlights why this kind of guidance is needed, is that it is a huge moment for some women to have had these experiences, and we have to validate that. We have to validate the grief around that and support women through it. And it's not that we're going to make it go away and be all fine, but support them in coping with the unfortunate reality that they've had to go through. And, I think it's highly illustrative how many years ago this was for this individual, and yet it still sits with her very much.
I can really hear it. And Leora, I just really want to acknowledge the grief that you've lived with. Thank you so much for calling in. And I hope that you're okay after making this call, and just take care of yourself after talking about it. I know that's a hard experience to talk about. Let's take another call here now. Krista is on the line in Vancouver as we talk about what's needed to improve miscarriage care for patients. Hi, Krista. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Krista. Hi, I'm Krista. Hi, thanks for having me.
Sure thing. And what do you want to say about improving miscarriage care?
I think that we've come leaps and bounds, and I am so grateful for what's being talked about today. But I also think we need to talk about what happens after the miscarriage. I'm a death educator and in fact, a funeral director, and sometimes there's a legal requirement to deal with the remains. And that in itself, if people aren't expecting that, they might not know. And there can be so many decisions that need to be made, and it's an incredibly tender time. And if doctors also had a sense of this, oh gosh, we're going to have to refer someone on to have these remains dealt with. Maybe we should learn a little bit so we can help them navigate that next step.
What an important point. And so more education around that part of the process that they're going to have to go through. And I just have about a minute, but Krista, what is it that you're able to do to support people?
Well, in my educational practice, I just help make sure people know what's going to happen before it's going to happen. As a licensed funeral director, I can help people who might have a miscarriage or, in fact, a stillbirth, which is something that happens after 20 weeks or after 500 grams. And, now at that point, we've got to actually deal with the remains. That can be so hard. So someone who knows and can attend to this gently and with sensitivity and provide all the options, that can be so helpful at this really, really difficult time.
Yeah. Wow. What a salient point. Chrystia, thank you very much for that call.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
What do you think? Yeah.
No, I think it's a really valid point. I think it's something that people are not expecting when they have a pregnancy loss after 20 weeks. There is a legal obligation to dispose of the remains in an appropriate fashion, and we need to be as care providers counseling. Perhaps we've done the ultrasound and found there was no fetal heart at 22 weeks. Let's just say that the ultimate result of that will be a individual who has passed, and that needs to be dealt with actually to some degree in the same way as an adult passing. So that's often a shock and a difficult thing to sort of cope with, in addition to the new news of the loss. Sometimes it's in association with a deliberate loss, maybe related to a severe genetic problem. And again, going through all of that and then having the disposition, another event that adds to the grief. So I think it's wonderful that we have funeral directors that are sensitive to this and are aware that they can be part of that support to make it less traumatic for our patients.
Ongoing support. And lastly, Dr. Money, when it comes to these guidelines, what will it take to have them be implemented?
Well, I do think we have a good track record of guidelines from the SOGC being read and being thought about. And so it does put the onus on all of us in this general, whether we specifically do this type of care, whether we're advocating for it, to really think about our hospital, our health authority, our clinic, whatever. How could we do this better? How could we set it up better? How could we support women better? Is it physical resources? Is it even just cultural sensitivity to this? And it differs for different cultural groups as well. So it's opening the conversation, which I think is so important.
It is such an important conversation, and I really appreciate you being here for this today. Thank you.
Thank you.
As Dr. Deborah Money, a professor of obstetrics and gynecology, medicine and population at the University of BC. I really want to thank our callers who joined us and shared their stories. Really heartfelt. Thank you to Leora for calling in as well from Trail. If you want to email us, bctoday@cbc.ca.